Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Everyone online should be able to hear us at this point, and we have no video. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience, both in person and online. My name is Anne Ekblad, and I'm here with my colleague today, Kathleen Moore. And we are EBSCO employees, EBSCO product owners, working on various teams, Team Vega and Team Corsair, in order to provide functionality to the FOLIO community. Today, you all are here for the session as listed here, brainstorming use cases, practical applications for viewing mediated request data in the Lists app. And that's a mouthful. It's also a really complex topic. And so I'm so grateful, and new topic, especially the mediated requests application. So I'm so grateful that you're here today, and we look forward to this collaborative experience. So I just briefly want to highlight our agenda for the day. So firstly, I would like to provide an overview of the mediated request application. And secondly, we will provide an overview for those who are a little bit less familiar with an existing application called the Lists app application. And also we have hopefully an interactive Q&A. We realize that this is a really new and complex topic, so we're hopeful that we'll spur some interaction, and if not, we can definitely help to guide this part of the discussion. So firstly, let's talk about what mediated requests are and what this new application is that is pending TC and PC approval, called the Mediated Requests app. So what is the Mediated Requests app? The Mediated Requests app is its purpose within FOLIO is to enable the logic for creating, reviewing, and approving certain requests, small r, with minimal impact on standard circulation workflows. So this first point is just to highlight that we know as a FOLIO community that we already have a requests application, a proper requests application. But there is a need from some community members, and there was an expressed requirement from the Library of Congress, one of our newest community members who operates with an ECS environment or Enhanced Consortia Support multi-tenant environment, to create a solution that will allow for certain types digitally documenting certain types of physical mediated request or physical request mediation activities. And so, as mentioned here in our second bullet point, this particular mediated request application will facilitate specific types of mediated request activities. So currently in its inception, it is focusing on a couple of types of physical mediated request activities, such as confirming item arrival and sending an item in transit. Don't worry, there will be a demonstration for all of us to get a little bit more familiar with the mediated requests app in a minute. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this particular application connects with and also cooperates with the existing FOLIO requests application. So what we can see here in a minute from the demo is that while we are, again, familiar with the proper requests application within FOLIO, there is an option, or will be an option, for community members, once approved, to add this additional application into your suite of applications in order to facilitate points of physical mediation. So in a moment, we will get into a demonstration of this mediated requests application. But before we do that, I just want to point out a little bit more about how the mediated request application came to be. So the Library of Congress, who has just implemented a multi-tenant FOLIO environment for themselves, required that their congressional borrowers, or Congress people for the United States, have only specific staff members who can know who is requesting the item. And they also need to the staff members need to personally accept or confirm a particular request before it becomes a proper circulation request in the requests app. And they also need to conduct some points of physical mediation, as I just mentioned. So during the process of a request moving through the request workflow and becoming a loan, they need to be able to have authorized staff members check within FOLIO, check physically, and then acknowledge within FOLIO that the item has been received by their authorized staff members, of which there are just a few. And then they also need to be able to send the item along its way before the request is closed and the loan is created. For the Library of Congress, they have this mediated request app only in one specific tenant at this point. And so we don't currently have a mediated request, a community member who runs single tenant folio who's using the mediated request app. However, the Library of Congress does have an opportunity to use what is, or simulate almost, a mediated requests application, the mediated request application in like a single tenant environment, because they actually have the congressional staff, they have the congressional patrons within this tenant. And then they also have a small collection of materials that is only able to be requested by those congressional staff members. So it'll get a little bit clearer when we get into the demo, but what I would like for us to do is not to just focus on this first application of the mediated requests application, which is the Library of Congress application, but begin to expand our thoughts about how we can use the mediated request application once approved in the rest of our community environments. I don't necessarily think that every community member would appreciate using the mediated requests app, but I do think that we can begin to expand the thought out to perhaps special collections requesting or other types of unique requesting. As mentioned, these points of physical mediation really do involve acknowledging within FOLIO that an already requested item has been received by authorized staff members, reviewed by them. So we could potentially think of that action being taken at the point of an authorized staff member reviewing, let's say, a historical map. Is it in good enough condition to lend to the patron who has requested it? We're also taking great care with the materials that have been requested through this initial pre-request application, and we are also taking really great care of the patrons who are requesting these materials. So I realize that it's a little difficult to see the details when in an audience, a physical audience with this demo, but I just want to acknowledge that Kathleen and I will post our slides to SCED after this presentation. Also, again, my name is Ann Ekblad, and I currently work with Team Vega. And if there is any interest in the mediated request application after today's presentation, please feel free to contact me via Slack. Also, if there are any thoughts about the use of the mediated request application in your environment following this, this talk today, please feel free to email me or reach out to me in another way. Kathleen and I have our work on JIRA, and we're happy to, add community thoughts to JIRA either via a new feature or some stories, something like that. Because, this really, we do see the mediated requests app advancing beyond the Library of Congress, although we are very grateful for them pointing out that it's need. I do also just briefly want to mention that when we first recognized this requirement by the Library of Congress, we did do our due diligence as product owners and development teams to try to understand if a new application was really necessary within FOLIO versus augmenting the existing request application. We determined that there was such a need for an additional application that it warranted this add that we made within FOLIO. And we also determined that One, understanding that we really didn't want to add to the complexity of the existing request application that everyone is used to within the FOLIO community, but also we recognize that not every community member, every community library or future community libraries is going to have the need for mediated requesting. So we did not want to just add and cause confusion, and we also wanted to be mindful of the immense amount of data and work that's already been put into the request app, so much so that it did not warrant adding this significant amount of work. So I am going to play this particular demo. It is approximately 3 minutes and 33 seconds. And during the demo, I will likely talk over the silent demonstration just to provide more context. And what I want to point out here is that we are going to start in the mediated request application, and what we will see is this act of saving and closing a mediated request and also confirming a mediated request. One of the reasons why this is important to point out is a mediated request differs from an actual circulation request like we usually see in the request application in a number of ways, but one of which is, and this was also a requirement by the Library of Congress, and we can see this extending out to the community as well, a mediated request really needs to be reviewed in their use case by an authorized staff member before it's actually confirmed as a proper circulation request. And the way that they handle that and the way that we developed it is to have the ability to save and close a mediated request and then actually be able to edit a lot of details on the mediated request before confirming it. And following the demonstration, I will be showing or demonstrating a chart that expresses that there are statuses that are unique to the mediated request application, including this new awaiting confirmation status, that cooperate with our existing request statuses. All right, here we go. So we'll see that we're currently in the mediated request. Much like a circulation request within the request app, our staff user is actually creating a mediated request. That save and close ended up creating the mediated request, and we can see that the request status is new awaiting confirmation. We can see also that the staff member has now edited the mediated request to their liking, and they have confirmed it. Once confirmed, the mediated request there is a circulation request created in the request app, and we can see that it is linked to the mediated request. There is some toggling across tenants that we see here, and some of that is because the item itself is actually in another tenant. And so what we can see here is that there are staff members who are retrieving the material from the shelf, and they are actually going to be sending it back to the authorized staff members who are operating with the mediated request app, and they are going to use an interim service point. And so part of this is this proper request that was created. The material is not going to go directly into the patron's hands until the authorized staff members recognize that it's okay to get it into their hands. So we can see here that the staff member is using what we call mediated request activities. They are confirming that the item has arrived. The status is going to change. They are now confirming that it is going to be in transit to the patron. And in this case, we're demonstrating the syncing of the request statuses and the item statuses. And so now we're actually checking the item in at the service point, the pickup service point for the patron. And in this case, we're actually checking the item out to the patron. And we're checking here just to ensure that there is an open loan. So at this point, the request and the mediated requests are in closed filled status, and we're just following the journey of the loan at this point. Again, we're just showing a little bit of how the statuses sync up, both the request status, the mediated request status, the request status, and the item statuses. Okay, so now the patron is finished with this item, and so we're going to check the item in. And because this is an ECS environment, we need to ensure that we not only check the item in for the Library of Congress's case in the central tenant, and I'll explain that in just one moment, but also what we're demonstrating here is that the request, the loan status syncs between the central tenant and this tenant where the patron user is. And then we're actually going to check the item in the tenant where the item lives, in the data tenant. So that was a whirlwind as it relates to what happens when you not only create a mediated request, confirm it to be a proper circulation request within our familiar request application, but also create a loan and have that item come back to the library. What I'd like to do next is just briefly touch base on the mediated and circulation request statuses. So when we were originally creating the mediated request, we recognized that not only could we not use the initial, our familiar request application, which has these statuses that we see at the bottom, such as open not filled, open await in transit, open awaiting pickup or delivery, and closed filled. So we couldn't just rely on the request application itself. We also couldn't rely on just the same statuses as it related to this new mediated request application. One of the reasons for that is there was a requirement, and other community members may appreciate this, to actually confirm that it's really okay for this patron to request this item that they're really wanting, or the title that they're really wanting. It was also important for the Library of Congress, and maybe important to other community members, to be able to edit significantly the mediated request prior to confirming it. So we see this brand new status of new awaiting confirmation. One of the things that I do want to point out is at the top, we actually see a division between what we consider to be the status and a mediated workflow step. So we can see at the bottom, traditionally the request application in FOLIO has what we consider to be one status. So we see open dash, not yet filled, open dash, in transit, etc. What we've done with the mediated request application is on the back end, not the UI, but on the back end, we have separated the status and the mediated workflow step. One of the reasons we've taken that step is we understand that there are going to be some workflow steps that the community will use when adopting this mediated request workflow or the mediated request application. We also can't be in the business of understanding that we know how every community member is going to conduct their workflow for this type of application. So we can see that we now, within the mediated request application, have the ability to separate status, such as new, open, and closed, from mediated request status workflow steps. One thing that I do want to point out is, while we have this ability on the back end, I don't think that we as community members are going to want to be in the business of adding a large number of workflow steps. So what we need to do as we begin to use this application as community is recognize that we might end up adding some mediated workflow steps that the majority of the community is going to want to use, but we need to be very judicious in adding them. Lastly, with the proper circulation request that's already in existence, we would like over time to also separate status from steps. So in the future, we could see on the back end a separation from open to not yet filled, etc. So I know that I have breezed through that, and I am going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Kathleen Moore. And one of the main reasons we want to present today and conduct this, on this topic is because we recognize that not only is this a new application, But we're interested in advancing the Lists app and the data that our community can gain from the Lists app. And so what we want to do today is co-present and think about the ways that we can harness the existing data within the Mediated Requests app, which we can think of as very similar to the Requests app that's already existing, so that we can get the most out of the data that we have available to us in this mediated requests application. And so Kathleen will be discussing the lists application that's already existing within FOLIO and some of the possibilities that we could envision for this new application and its data. We also will breathe enough to really ask for more of an interactive portion of our presentation, some ideas from you as the community of what types of data you would like to see in the Lists app as it relates to this mediated requests app. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Okay. As Anne said, I am Kathleen Moore. I am a product owner for the Lists app. And so I'm going to do just a quick overview of the Lists app for anybody who might not be familiar with what it has so far. And what the Lists app does is it allows you to create lists of different type of records. And so what I have up on the screen currently is just to give you a high-level idea of the type of records that you're able to create lists of. In the Ramson's release as the left column, and then Sunflower, we have added all of the additional record types in the middle and right column. Trillium, again, we're adding quite a bit more content in terms of data. And so we fully intend for the Lists app to cover, virtually anything that you would need out of FOLIO. And so we're trying to rapidly expand that coverage. One thing that you might notice related to this presentation that is not present is requests or mediated requests. And so, those are not currently available. We will be working on adding requests shortly, and hopefully mediated requests will follow quickly after that. I'll also give a little bit of context about how the Lists app works if you happen to be in a ECS or a consortial environment. We do have a little bit of functionality that is different and unique to that setting. All of the list functionality that you have in a non-ECS version is also available in the consortial version with some added functionality where in an ECS environment, when you're in the central tenant, you're able to create lists that contain data from some of the other tenants. There are a little bit of restrictions on that, and I'll cover that in just a second here. So another thing that's essential about the Lists app is how we manage access to the content in the Lists app. So this is a slide we'll be talking about ECS specifically, but all of this is true for a non-ECS version minus the tenant affiliation. So in the Lists app, for a given tenant affiliation, you have to have access to the Lists app and that tenant. You also have to have access to whatever record types you're trying to create a list of in that tenant. And so those content permissions are based on the user's regular permissions that they would already have to do their role. And so the idea is that, if somebody has access to the Orders app, then in the Lists app, they'd be able to see order information, or users, they'd be able to see user information. But if they don't have access to these other apps with their usual FOLIO permissions, they would not be able to see that content in the Lists app. And so in ECS, it really just adds that you have to have both the Lists app permissions as well as the content permissions in every tenant or otherwise you won't be able to access data from that. And then again, it's the same in a non-ECS environment. I'm also going to briefly cover the idea of cross-tenant queries. And so again, this is only going to be in an ECS or a consortial environment. And it happens when you're specifically in the central tenant, you're able to create a list of records that can include data from some of the other member or data tenants. So this is specific to select record types. Currently, it is limited to inventory instances, holdings, and item records. And again, you have to have access to permissions in that any given tenant or affiliation, as well as a list app. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see the content for that. And then on the right, it's showing, essentially how it works in a non-ECS environment, which is the same as it works in within a tenant of a ECS environment, non-central tenant. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, so I mentioned that we don't have requests in the list app yet. So I'm going to use loans as an example to just give you an idea of the type of content that we currently have for loans and to sort of jumpstart some ideas for what that might mean for requests or mediated requests. So even though this is a list of loans, and in the list app we're calling this a loans record type, it actually contains data from a variety of different records, as well as a variety of different apps. So we've got some information about the loan here. So like in this case, we've got the due date. We've got patron group. We've also got additional user data that just doesn't happen to fit on the screen here. We also include item record data, as well as instances data, so information about the actual title. So, the idea of the list app is that being able to combine different data from various types of records to really see what it is that is useful to our users of Folio. And so creating a list of loans that contain all of that information. If you wanted to be able to filter it down by patron group and see, if there are trends. The same thing with requests or mediated requests. We really want to understand what it is that you might want to be able to see with that data within the list app. Let me take a step back. This screenshot is also a good example of, what would happen in a non-ECS environment with loans, where all of the data for that loan, as well as the user, the item, the instance, all lives within that single tenant. And so that's what any single tenant Folio would look like, as well as some use cases within ECS. I'm going to quickly go over what can potentially happen when you're using loans in an ECS environment. And in this example, as Anne showed in her workflow, once there is the mediated request and it is confirmed, and it actually gets to the point of the item being checked out, at that point, it would generate a loan. And so that's what this is really designed to show here. On the left being the secure tenant. So that would be the case of Library of Congress. If it was a different consortial environment, it could be just another data tenant. It doesn't have to be the secure tenant. In the middle, the central tenant, and on the right, just another member or data tenant. So in this case, for the Library of Congress, there would be the secure user that lives inside that secure tenant. Again, in a non-secure version, it doesn't have to be a secure user. It could just be a patron. However, the way that it is set up, there is an instance from the central tenant that is shared with all of the other members in that ECS. And so what happens in this case, there is a member or a data tenant on the right here that has the holdings and the items record that is of interest and that the somebody could do a mediated request for that would then in turn generate a loan when you get to that point in the workflow. At that point, once the loan starts, it would create a loan in that member tenant. It would create a loan in the central tenant, and it would create a third loan, in this case in the secure tenant or the other member tenant. And so I won't go into too much detail here other than to show, as you can see, the data is really spread out amongst these tenants. And so depending on the context that you're in, you might have access to data in some settings that you don't in others. And so it can get really in the weeds and complicated. And so more than happy to talk to people about details or specifics for anybody who wants to know, but I won't dive into that initially. All right. So I guess let's start and see if anybody has any questions about anything that they have seen that we want to, because it is a lot. So,
Here, I can run it. Okay, does anyone have a question? I think Susan did.
So my question is about the mediated mediated request. I'm curious what information is passed to the request once it becomes a regular request. I'm assuming that the user information is obscured, but sort of how do they keep track of it once they have the item in hand? I guess it goes back to that service point that's mediated, but obviously the patron is not there. Is that right?
Yes, I'll let Kathleen explain what information is available in the multi-tenant environment, and then we can circle back to how it gets a little bit more about how it gets back to the authorized staff members in the mediated request.
yeah, so in the case of when you're looking at it within the tenant that the mediated request came from, in that case, it'll include all of the user information, and so you'll be able to see all the details about the user. If you are looking at it from the perspective of in the chart I had up previously, on the right there, the member tenant, you would be able to see limited details about the user. Limited details include the patron group, whether the user is active, the type of user that it is, and in some scenarios, you can see the user's barcode. It doesn't include any other patron data about that user in that situation. If then we were to look at it from the context of the secure tenant, it is slightly different again, where again, outside of that, you wouldn't be able to see an actual barcode for that user. It is a made up fake barcode that would be visible for that user, as well as the name. Instead of just being missing, it says, secure patron. And so, there is some user information that is shared, but very limited way.
Thanks.
Sure. So also, the Library of Congress, their multi-tenant environment does include this secure tenant. As Kathleen mentioned, not every institution or multiple institutions that adopt the ECS model will need that. And so within the tenant itself, so we could pretend in this case, we could look forward to a single tenant folio institution adopting or implementing the mediated request app. the same users who have access to the mediated requests application would also be able to transition to the request application and see the same amount of information. I may have glossed over it, but once the mediated request has been confirmed to be a circulation request, there is a link that clicks out to the request application. I think that one of the things that I'm wondering now with Susan's question, it's causing me to think a little bit more about what would happen if we would want a single tenant folio institution who would want to obfuscate some data from the mediated request application within the request application. And we could perhaps take a look at what that would look like. My initial thought is we would probably need a multi-tenant environment, but I'm sometimes wrong with what we can do in that case. And as mentioned, and as Susan seems to have a hold on, and perhaps others do too, one of the things that's very important is that we do have this interim service point that we have adopted. So every mediated request at this point, whether it is going to be picked up by the user at the library, the patron user, or delivered to the patron user, does have in the process an interim service point, and that is to ensure that the item does get transitioned back to the staff members who are operating with the mediated request itself. I don't know who was next between y'all. Okay, I'm going here in the D.
I'm Grace Bischoff from the Library of Congress, and I had kind of an addition to that also. So we have the scenario that Anne and Kathleen were describing, where we have this need to have obfuscated patron data for the secure tenant. But as the mediated request app is approved and adopted, it's possible that we could also use it for various special collections that we have. And so I don't know if this is a question or a comment or just another use case, that we could have a situation where we have the obfuscated data patron data coming from the secure tenant. Most of our patrons live in the central tenant. But if we wanted to mediate items from another data tenant, it would be interesting to think about where the patrons then might live if they didn't have to be obfuscated, and kind of that use case as well, right? In a multi-tenant scenario. So not really a question, but if anybody had thoughts about that, that would be cool.
Thanks, Grace. That's a really good point. And one of the things within an ECS environment that we have to kind of continuously remind ourselves as we're working to develop it is, in order to make a request, we really need a user and we need either a title or an item. Ultimately, it really needs to be an item available to us. And so it's very difficult for us to think about a concept where we would be able to place a request within a tenant on a user who's not in that tenant currently. So, that is kind of interesting to begin to think about in an ECS environment, that because we do think about perhaps special collection requesting originating from a particular data tenant. So that's something that we could consider in the future. But for right now, I find that I have to reframe my mind with questions like this too. We need a user in order to make a request. So in this case with the Library of Congress, if we don't go further right now, it's possible that mediated request would be sitting in the central tenant. So that's also an idea. And so, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a question about mediated requests also. There seems to be some relationship here between that app and the for use at location reading room circulation functionality that's being developed for the National Library of Sweden's FOLIO implementation. Overlap both in terms of use case for special collections use, right? But also overlap in an interesting way in philosophy of design. You were talking about intentionally not modifying the existing request app, but working with it. And as I understand it, for use and location adds a few things to the request app. So I'm wondering at the high level, is there conversation between this implementation and that implementation? And if so, what are some of those ways that the two apps can work together or the two solutions can work together?
I'm really grateful you're asking this question, and I'm actually going to turn to the chat, and I'm hoping that someone either from the Clemming team or index data, or the the National Library of Sweden can help here. So as far as the interaction that Team Vega, which is a main development team right now for circulation functionality, has to, what our role is related to the reading room circulation functionality that's currently being developed by Index Data for the National Library of Sweden is there are a couple things. So one, their functionality currently, so the reading room application functionality is currently being developed for single tenant folio only, although there may be a possibility in the future to open it up. That would be up to Clemming and Index Data to kind of continue that conversation. One of the main ways that Team Vega, or the core function, one of the core function teams for circulation for Folio, is working with these teams on related to the reading room circulation information, is to recognize that this is part of a community of development. So one of the things that we do in Folio, as we know, is maintain this concept of we work within a community and we accept new work by other development teams. And we also recognize that there are requirements that are made by institutions that are adopting Folio. Team Vega at this point is responsible for reviewing the development pull requests that are made by the Clemming team on behalf of this new functionality. So it is our position to be able to ensure that we are approving work that does not go against any of the existing work that's within Folio. In addition to that, I'm actually wondering if someone from either Clemming or Index Data or the National Library of Sweden would like to expound on what I just said, because I think it would be best for them to explain it further.
Into chat.
I think your question is fantastic, and I actually am hoping that someone from those teams will be able to reach out to the community and express a little bit more about how their work, with the reason behind their work getting started, as opposed to or not as opposed to, but how it would cooperate in the future with the mediated request application.
Okay, I'm going to read one of the questions from chat, which is the mediated request has to be confirmed, and then a request in the request app is automatically created. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, you've understood that correctly.
And then the second part of that is it possible to change the loan conditions when confirming, as in other loan type or service point?
Currently, the service point that needs to be involved in order to facilitate the workflow for the mediated request activities needs to be the interim service point. Although the patron's pickup service point and or delivery address can be the selected, just like a regular request. And the patron will actually, the patron's pickup service point or delivery service point will be selected at the beginning of the mediated request process. So when confirming a mediated request, we will already know where the item is going in order to loan the item. Related to adjusting loan, I'm sorry, it was loan what?
Loan type or service point.
And is this prior to?
Doesn't.
Okay, just one moment, please. It is possible after the mediated request it is possible when a mediated request is in new awaiting confirmation status to change a number of the points of data, we could call them, in the mediated request itself, and that is done by editing the mediated request. The loan type parameter is really going to depend on the data tenant where the material is, like the loan itself, the loan policies are going to be used from they will actually be the data tenant where the item lives loan policies. So that's one of the things that I would say. The other thing is, and this might be exactly what you're asking about. So the mediated requests, new mediated request form does allow for title level request or item level request. And so if there is a new mediated request form that is being edited prior to confirmation, the staff member can change from title level request to item level request or item level request to title level request. I think that's what you were getting at prior to confirming the mediated request.
I'll read another question from chat. So the mediated request functionality is particularly interesting for those of our member libraries with special collections. In those cases, the requester information is highly important to determine whether a highly valuable item will actually be made available to a researcher. If mediated requests are used in a single tenant environment, will all patron data be available to the staff working with the mediated request app?
Yes.
So I have a question that's kind of twofold. One, in that chart that you showed previously of the different statuses, the create step had both a staff request, which you demoed, but it also said from the OPAC, which implies there's a patron-facing way to submit a mediated request. Can you talk to us about that? And my other question is, so far we've talked about the trigger from the mediated request seemed to be patron type. Is there conditional logic on the settings to make it dependent on material type or shelving location for special collections items?
Thank you so much for both of these questions. Currently, the team's Dreamliner is actually working on the locate, as just an example of an OPAC. Dreamliner for one of FOLIO's core teams that facilitates OPAC development is currently working with the Library of Congress to get the concept up to speed of congressional staff members who are, again, this first use case that we have, being able to request through the OPAC. And what the function of that needs to be is that if you are a congressional staff member, probably likely patron group will be used. And the funnel from the OPAC in that case would be, if there is this type of patron, you need to be able to ensure that the OPAC request goes directly into the mediated requests application as opposed to the request application. In the case of the Library of Congress, it is mandatory that all congressional patron requests, whether either a staff initiated or a patron initiated request, goes directly to the mediated request. So there is this concept in progress. We, related to considering material type, et cetera, we haven't gone very deep into that, but I could imagine that that would be possible in the future. How, not only from the staff perspective who's operating within FOLIO, but also the patron perspective. And so I think we would probably need to flesh out that use case. And actually, your question here is one of the reasons why it's important to have this session, because as Kathleen mentioned, one of the points of using the Lists app is to not only just get simple, what I would consider to be simple information from the Lists app related to mediated requests, but also more complex information. So the mediated request has been created. It's actually using material type, or it's using patron group in order to create that request. What does that look like in the future? So to be continued on some of that, but currently with OPAC, where that team is working in the direction of using patron group, is my understanding.
Time, but there's
Oh, we're at time. Okay, sure. Yes. So there is a response from a team member from NLS related to our question earlier today, or earlier in this session, related regarding the reading room application. And it says, use at location is a function to track if in-house items are in use in a reading room or held on the shelf when an item is checked out. So this is a check-out, check-in action that's happening after the request is being created, after requesting. So it's my understanding that this response is more to differentiate the reading room application functionality from the mediated request functionality, which totally makes sense. Thank you so much for the clarification. And I realize that we're over time. We actually have questions that are still coming in through the chat. So perhaps Kathleen and I can continue to monitor the chat for a few minutes and reply back via the chat.
Yep. And we're happy to stick around if anybody has questions as well.
And we also recognize we probably need to do this session again and ask for an hour and a half. So thank you all so much for attending today. We really